This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvie. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvie the King. Are you guys ready to talk about football? It's 90 days away, and I can't wait. There's so much going on. Let's start out with some NFL news. Tom Brady, we talked a little bit about him last week. He's again in the news. It's never going to go away. He filed his appeal to uphold his suspension, and now the Patriots are even getting in on the gig. They've supported him all the way, but they've never actually had any action to stand with him. So they filed a brief with the second U.S. court saying that they stand to lose their all-pro quarterback for 25% of the upcoming regular season based on a severely flawed process. What this really leads me to believe is that Brady's going to get out of this. There's no getting around it. It's between him and Goodell is going to lose a second time. So you're still keep an eye on it. There's still the chance that the suspension is upheld. But if it goes the way of Tom Brady and the Patriots, Tom Brady moves way up on draft boards. He really is. He's a game changer. He was a top 5 quarterback last year, and I don't see any reason why that's going to change. Drew Brees, he's not worried about having an extension, which will be good news for fantasy owners. Because we won't have to worry about him feuding with the Saints. And it might actually give him some sort of incentive to go out and produce at a high level. We've seen Drew Brees come out. We know he can get 4,500, 5,000 yards if he really wants to. I think he still has the ability to do this next year. So if he wants to stay with the Saints for the rest of his career, it's gonna behoove him to have another pretty solid season. And I think he definitely still has some weapons down there. Deshaun Jackson, he's been missing voluntary workouts, but it's not for a dispute with the team, and it's not really a big deal. But when the Redskins went out and drafted Josh Doctson in the first round, it pretty much made either Deshaun Jackson or Pierre Garçon expendable. So I would want to have as much time around the team as possible, because more than likely, Doctson and Jackson are really two similar characters. Pierre Garçon is more of a route runner, where Deshaun Jackson is the guy who you can basically just say, run 40 yards, and Kirk Cousins can possibly try and hit him on a deep route. It's Jackson's and Garçon's contract years, and they're going to be fighting for the same spot. Contract years are usually good, but if Josh Doctson comes in right away and is able to eat away and kind of gain the trust of Kirk Cousins, it could be bad news for Deshaun Jackson. I still think he's going to have a decent year, but if Doctson comes in and he performs right away, it's definitely gonna spell bad news for Deshaun Jackson. Free agent Arian Foster, he says he needs about another month to be in top shape, and by top shape, he's actually saying that he's going to be back to normal at his Pro Bowl level. He's going to be a really interesting story to watch come the next couple months when training camp starts, as injuries start to pile up for other teams. He's injury prone, but if there's any player who's a free agent, if you're going into a draft and he's still a free agent, that's a guy that I would want to pick up if you're picking him up in mid to late rounds, because teams there's going to be injuries. Look at the guys like Jamal Charles, at Le'Veon Bell. Maybe Adrian Peterson breaks down this year. But something's going to happen, and Arian Foster is going to get on a team this year. And more than likely, he's going to be able to produce. This isn't a guy who's too far removed from being a really, really productive running back. You look just last year, he was on a roll, but then he got hurt, obviously. And that's something you're going to have to deal with. You're not sure how much you get out of him, even if he is a free agent, gets signed by a team. You're likely looking at about a 6-week window of really solid play, and then anything after that is really gravy for him. A crazy bettor put down $9,000 on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win the Super Bowl this past week in Las Vegas. I'm not sure if this guy is crazy or if he's on to something. More than likely he's crazy, but I do like Jameis Winston. He started to come into his own. He still has Vincent Jackson. He still has Mike Evans. Austin Seferian-Jenkins was started to come around last year. And then Doug Martin really had a resurgence. So if it's likely crazy. The guy is going to basically just, burn $9,000. But if the Buccaneers win, I mean, it's a pretty solid bet. All of those players should be drafted higher than last year, though. You look at Jameis Winston, he was likely not even drafted. He should be going as like a backup quarterback at least. And Mike Evans and Vincent Jackson should return to form. I know Evans was battling an injury last year. The last piece of news that I want to bring up is with my hometown team, the Detroit Lions. It came out earlier this week at the beginning of OTAs that running back Amir Abdullah had surgery in January for a torn labrum, it was news to everybody. And he's likely going to be out until the beginning or maybe even the middle of training camp. It's very worrisome for me as a fan and also as a fantasy owner. Amir Abdullah, he showed flashes last year, and he definitely has the quickness and the speed to be a really talented running back in the NFL. But you also want to see those guys in training camp getting ready, and that's something that he needs the most, because he really lost the confidence of the Lions as a whole last year. He had his fumbling issues, and Caldwell really just went away from him. He went a lot to Theo Riddick. Joique Bell, even though he wasn't producing, he had more faith in him than a stud rookie in Amir Abdullah. So look for Amir Abdullah. Watch his progress as he's getting healthier, and when he gets back into training camp, you're going to have a close eye on him, see what he's doing, see if he actually is participating, and draft him accordingly in your leagues. He still has a ton of time to get healthy, but I just want to throw that out there as a last bit of news. So now we're going to go around the league. As I did last week, I started with the NFC North, detailed the players on those teams and who you should be looking at drafting. This week, we're going to go with their counterpart in the AFC North, and we'll start with who won the division last year, the Cincinnati Bengals, who they won the division, but really hit a tough break because Andy Dalton had the hand injury, and they were bounced from the playoffs. So I think they're going to pick up right where they left off last year. Andy Dalton, he's really been a model of consistency the last couple of years. He's in 13 games last year, he went 25-7, touchdown to interceptions. He's more of the third tier quarterback, because you have a top tier of quarterbacks that's essentially Aaron Rodgers, and I'm not sure if you put Cam Newton in there, but the top tier, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, those kind of players. Then you have a second tier, which likely fills out the top 10 quarterbacks. And then Andy Dalton really fits into a third tier. He's probably somewhere between the number 12 to number 16 quarterback ranked overall. But he's consistent, and you don't really want to depend on him to be a starter, but in a pinch, if you have a better quarterback and he goes down, Andy Dalton is a really solid option. The running backs is probably one of the truest forms of a running back by committee. You got Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill. Jeremy Hill I think he was rated pretty high last year. I think they saw what he had done in 2014 and thought that he'd improve on that. But he had some fumbling issues. He still got into the end zone more often than not, but he just really didn't play like a true running back number one. So, and Giovanni Bernard is still there. I think people really counted him out last year, but he kind of showed that he still deserves to be there. He's still a productive running back. And Giovanni Bernard is way better served in PPR leagues. So those two running backs, you kind of have to look at them, and you're going to have to try and decide which one is going to be the hot hand. In their wide receiver core, AJ Green, he's still a top flight wide receiver, and you're going to see him go somewhere in the first 3 rounds. I'm not sure if he's a first round pick, but you're likely going to see him go somewhere in the later part of the second round. But after AJ Green, it's really a big question mark. You know, Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu, they're both gone from the team. The two main guys that they have to try and replace them are Brandon LaFell and Brandon Tate, and they're going to be serviceable, but I don't really see a whole lot of value with them. The one guy that I do like, they drafted Tyler Boyd, and he's an interesting pick, and he's somebody that I would look more at the end of your draft as a more of a late round flyer. And I mean, really, the number 2 option in Cincinnati is their tight end, Tyler Eifert, and he showed last year he's one of the top tight ends in the league. Now he has some injury troubles right now, but I really expect him to come in this season and still compete at a high level and be one of the top 5 tight ends in the league. So to recap the Bengals, Andy Dalton, look for him in the mid to late rounds. He's going to be your backup quarterback, or unless you really missed and you waited on quarterbacks, he could be your starter in later rounds. Jeremy Hill, I would start looking for him in regular leagues around the 5th round, and with Giovanni Bernard in the 7th round. If this is a PPR league, I think you almost bump Giovanni Bernard up to at least the 6th or maybe the 5th if there is a run on running backs. AJ Green, as I said before, he's likely going to go somewhere in the later part of the 2nd round. And the rest of the wide receivers after AJ Green, even the Tyler Boyd, they're going to be late round or more than likely undrafted, because Tyler Eifert is going to be the next best option. I see him going, tight ends. It's become more of an interesting position with, the Gronkowskis and the Jimmy Graham. If you really value a tight end and making sure that tight end is a position that you win every week, I could see going up for Tyler Eifert as high as maybe the 6th round, but I really don't see him going until 7th round and later. That's as comfortable as I feel about Tyler Eifert. The second team in the AFC North are the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is a team that I don't think you can really go wrong with any of their players on their offense. It's a high-powered offense. They score a lot. They have a ton of weapons, and it's a fantasy player's dream. Quarterback, you got Ben Roethlisberger. He's been around 12, 13 years. He only played 12 games, and he nearly hit 4,000 yards. So if you can get a healthy season out of Big Ben, you're looking at top 10 quarterback points for him. And with what they've been doing, if you have Le'Veon Bell healthy and you have all your other pieces healthy, Big Ben is going to score you just ridiculous amounts of points. At the running back, you got Le'Veon Bell. He's coming off an injury, but he's more than likely going to be healthy coming into this season, and he's gonna go in the first round. He's gonna get some people who are gonna go first overall, which might be a little hasty coming off an injury, but that's just how good Le'Veon Bell is. He has the skill to be a runner, but especially in PPR, when you get into a PPR league, that's where Le'Veon Bell really becomes the number one back, because he has that ability to rush for over 1,000 yards, but then also go out and get 70 receptions. Le'Veon Bell is going to be a stud for the years to come if he can stay healthy. And what I would advise with Le'Veon Bell is you need to draft D'Angelo Williams, and you're gonna have to draft him sooner rather than later. Somebody's gonna reach for D'Angelo Williams, because you saw what happened last year. Williams came in, and when Bell went down, he was in for the first 2 games of the season when Bell was suspended, and Williams was fine, and he got kind of put to the side because Bell came in, and he just picked off where he left off. And then when Williams took over, there really was no letdown from those first 2 games of the season. And with Bell's injury history, I think you're going to have to spend a higher draft pick on Williams, because one of the biggest things that kills people in fantasy seasons is when your high draft picks get hurt. If your first round or second round draft pick get hurt or they get suspended, it really ruins your season, because those are the guys that you drafted that you are going to depend on the entire season, that you can ride them all the way through. And if Bell was to go down again, you're going to want to have D'Angelo Williams this year, because you saw that he still has the ability to be a low-end number one running back. So when we go to wide receivers, man, the Steelers, they're just stacked. They have literally probably the best wide receiver in the league right now. You have Antonio Brown. He's going to go in the first round, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody drafts him number 1 as well. You have Le'Veon Bell, and now you have Antonio Brown, 2 guys who could arguably be the first player drafted overall in leagues, especially in a PPR league. Antonio Brown, all he does, he catches passes and he catches touchdowns, and he's going to get you a ton of points. Unfortunately, they're going to be without Martavis Bryant all year, unless some strange ruling comes that he can smoke pot. But you're not going to have Martavis Bryant all year. They still have a ton of options, though. You have Marcus Wheaton, Darius Hayward-Bay, and Sammy Coates, and all those guys are going to have really big games. The number 2 guy I really see is Marcus Wheaton. He's going to be the number 2 guy. And then Hayward-Bay and Sammy Coates are going to have flashes. It's like when the Rams really started having their high-powered offense. You had Marcus Colston, or when Jimmy Graham was getting all of his yards, you had the one player who you knew was going to be good every week, and then you had to pick between which other receiver was just gonna hit it off. So Hayward-Bay and Sammy Coates, they're gonna have a big game, but you're not sure when it's gonna happen. And then for the first time on tight end, no Heath Miller. He's Big Ben's safety blanket. But they went out and they signed free agent Ladarius Green, who really got his start in San Diego. He got a lot of help because Phillip Rivers loves himself some tight end, and he learned from Antonio Gates. And I think they see Ladarius Green as he's going to be kind of the 2A. You have Marcus Wheaton to really replace Martavis Bryant, but I think they have Ladarius Green now, he's a fast tight end. He's somebody who's going to be a mismatch for the opposing team's tight ends. He does have injury problems, but he's going to go out there. He's going to help stretch the field, and whenever he gets healthy, he has the potential to be a top tight end. So to recap the Steelers, Big Ben, you're going to look for him in the mid rounds, right around the mid rounds, maybe a little bit before. You want to let all the top quarterbacks go out. You want to let the Rodgers and the Breeze and the Cam Newtons, let those guys all go past, and then that's when you're going to want to start looking for Big Ben. He's right on the lowest tier of being a starter in a league. You're going to draft him. He's probably going to be if you're in a 10-team league, Ben Roethlisberger should probably be one of the last, like somewhere between the 8th to 10th quarterback drafted. At running back, Le'Veon Bell, as I said, he's a number 1 overall candidate, and he's going to be a first rounder. Antonio Brown, if he's not a first rounder, I'm not sure what's going on with your league, because he has the ability. He scores the points. The stats are out there to back me up. Antonio Brown is going to be a first round pick, and I really think he should be considered as for first overall as well. Marcus Wheaton, I'd look for him starting around the 6th or the 7th round, and then Hayward Bay and Sammy Coates are more than likely late round depth picks. It's when you're really trying to fill out your team. That's when you go for those guys. And then depending on his health, I think Ladarius Green could be a top 10 tight end, but I would wait for the other top tight ends to go before really taking a look at Ladarius Green. If you go by the mantra of really waiting on a tight end, Ladarius Green is probably around the player that you want to start looking at tight ends, because it's a position that you need to have, and it definitely helps to have somebody who can catch a bunch of touchdowns and get a bunch of yards, which Ladarius Green is. Third place team in the AFC North, the Baltimore Ravens. And I think their team, they're really trying to still figure out who they are right now. There's a lot of question marks down there. Joe Flacco, who is at best a backup quarterback in fantasy. He usually gets somewhere around 4,000 yards, around 20 touchdowns, but he's not a guy that you start every week. He's not that every game starter. He's a dependable backup who, when you go out and draft Aaron Rodgers, you look to try and get a Joe Flacco, or maybe it's one of those second-tier quarterbacks. Maybe you drafted Russell Wilson. Joe Flacco is a guy that you can have for your bye week. The one thing that has kind of plagued him and still is a big question mark this year is Flacco really doesn't have a ton to work with. Ever since Torrey Smith and Ray Rice, all those guys, Anquan Bolden, all those guys are gone, he doesn't have a ton of help to really to provide him with the support to make him be a better quarterback. At running back, the Ravens is a team that I really don't want to depend on any of the Ravens running backs. The situation is just so murky with injuries, and nobody just stands out. It's kind of like the Lions. The Justin Forsett, he broke his arm last year, and you're going to have to watch how he's coming back from the injury. And Forsett is a guy who he just always seems to be injured. 2 years ago, 2014, he really had a breakout year. He was okay at the beginning of last season, but then he got hurt. And after Forsett, you have Buck Allen, and he was serviceable, but he's not a fantasy starter. He's depth at best. They have Trent Richardson, who he's not. I don't even know why he's on a team anymore. And then Lorenzo Taliaferro. All those guys are just a bunch of scrubs, fantasy-wise. The one guy who would be interesting, and you're going to have to watch him throughout OTAs, throughout training camp, and throughout the preseason games, is their rookie running back, Kenneth Dixon. And even him, he's going to have to show something to steal carries, but I really think he does have the ability to come in, and if he can just show that he's better than all those other guys after Justin Forsett, he can be the number 2 running back right away. And then it's just a hamstring injury for Forsett away before Kenneth Dixon is the starting running back for the Baltimore Ravens. The wide receivers, also a mess. They have a 37-year-old Steve Smith as their number 1 wide receiver, who the dude has essentially beaten time. To be 37 and to be able to do some of the things that Steve Smith has done is really impressive. but he got hurt again last year, missed the rest of the season. I was under the impression that it was going to be his last season, but obviously he feels like he has something still to prove. After him, Steve Smith, is, at best, he's a wide receiver too. I don't really want to depend on him being my number one wide receiver. And I say at best wide receiver 2. He's more likely a wide receiver 3 or a flex play. After him, you got Kamar Aiken, who showed a lot of promise last year. He's very boom or bust, and I think they were trying to have him fill the role that they lost in Torrey Smith. But Kamar Aiken, more weeks than not, he's going to be at best a wide receiver 3 to a flex play. I don't really want to depend on him. I am very interested to see what the 2015 rookie Brashad Perriman is going to do. He got hurt in preseason last year, and he was out all last year. He had a lot of hype going into the 2015 draft because he had that super fast 40 at the combine. Essentially shot him up in the draft boards because he was relatively unknown from Central Florida. But if he can stay healthy, it's really going to be interesting. I see Brashad Perriman as more of the guy that the Ravens want to fill the void that Torrey Smith left, because Torrey Smith was a big, tall receiver who was a burner. And Kamar Aiken's a burner, but he's a smaller guy. And I think with Joe Flacco, he does have a big arm. He's more of a game manager, but Brashad Perriman does give him that better ability to stretch the field. And so you're going to want to watch Perriman and see if he actually is progressing, and trying to see if Flacco and them get a good relationship. Now at tight end, they went out and signed Ben Watson, who he had a breakout year last year, but you can pretty much attribute all of that to being on the Saints. This is a Saints team that lost Jimmy Graham, he was probably the main focus of the passing offense. So the Ben Watson really wasn't doing a whole lot. I think they were going with Josh Hill to begin the season. Hill didn't really work out. Ben Watson came in and became a very dependable target for Drew Brees. But coming here to the Ravens, it's not a good move. I'm not really obviously it's probably for the money, but Ben Watson, he had 74 receptions last year. I think at best, you half that reception total, because I don't think that's what the Ravens on offense is. The Ravens are more of a traditional trying to ground it out ground it out with the run and try to get short passes, and with maybe a deep throw here and there. So Ben Watson, I think he's going to have a regression this year. And unfortunately for Crockett Gilmore, who was a rookie last year, with the addition of Ben Watson, he becomes an afterthought. If Ben Watson isn't going to be able to get the receptions, I don't even see how Crockett Gilmore can really be productive at all. So to recap the Ravens, Joe Flacco, I would only grab him in a late round, and this is when you're looking to grab your backup quarterback. So that's for Joe Flacco. Justin Forsett, just because he is a number one running back right now, and if he's healthy, I think he's somewhere in the mid rounds. He's after you got your first two running backs, when you're starting to look for depth. Justin Forsett is likely, he's a backup running back on your team. And for all the other running backs, they're either really late round or undrafted. If you want to take a flyer on Kenneth Dixon, as I said, you go ahead, but make sure that you have your team filled out by that point. Steve Smith, I think he's a wide receiver 2 at best, and I'd start looking somewhere around the 7th round for him. Kamar Aiken and Brashad Perriman, somewhere in the 9th or 10th round. Unless Perriman comes out in training camp and looks like a world beater, then he definitely shoots up the draft board. And then Ben Watson, I think he loses any credibility from last year. He's a late round pick if you're still looking for a tight end. but he's not a guy that I'm going to draft and expect to start him week 1 because I don't think you're going to get a ton from him. And the last team in the AFC North is the Cleveland Browns, the mistake by the lake. They are the cellar dwellers, and there's no hope for them this year. I mean, I could spin it if I really wanted. If I wanted to have brown tinted glasses and say that RG3 is going to be their savior, I think RG3 is just going to be the next quarterback on that jersey you see where they have all the former Browns quarterbacks. He's going to be the next name on there. So we start at quarterback. It's a gigantic question. Robert Griffin, he's the guy right now. And until he proves that he can be anywhere near his rookie form, the dude should be left alone. Obviously, he's a big name, and because of the potential he has, somebody's going to draft him late in the draft. And I'm not super against it. It's just not something that I want to do, because I think more than likely he's going to have a bad season. But I get the intrigue. At running back, I do like Duke Johnson. I think he's a guy that I liked coming on the draft last year in 2015, and he started to shine last year. But it's a big deal that they still have Isaiah Crowell there, and they see him more as the rushing downs, where Duke Johnson is more of a scat back out of the backfield. He's great for PPR, but until Duke Johnson really kind of takes over the every down back role, him and Isaiah Crowell they're going to have similar values unless you're in a PPR league. At wide receiver, Corey Coleman, as a rookie this year, he immediately comes in and he is the number one option, which, I mean, it's great that you're a number one option, but who do you have throwing to you? You have Robert Griffin III or Austin Davis or insert other Cody Kessler. He's interesting. I really get it. He was the best receiver in the draft this year, but until he gets a better quarterback or one of those guys who's on the team right now proves, Corey Coleman is going to be limited. And then after him, it's a big crapshoot. You have the two, I guess, veterans you have are Andrew Hawkins and Terrell Pryor, and then just a ton of rookies. They drafted 7 wide receivers in the draft this year. I don't want to have anything to do with any of those guys. I don't want to have to rely on Andrew Hawkins or Terrell Pryor or some garbage rookie on the Browns. The last player who I actually do like is Gary Barnidge. He was a huge surprise last year. He helped me win a fantasy championship at the Detroit Sports 105-1 league, but I really see him taking a step back this year. I think it's similar to what happened when Jordan Cameron was on the Browns. You know, you get this tall, quick wide receiver who gets a ton of touchdowns. Then everybody adapts to him. He's still going to get his points. He's the number 2 option after Corey Coleman, and I think he's going to develop into a safety valve for whoever the quarterback is. If it's RG3, if it's Josh McCown, but the possibility is there for Gary Barnidge to be a red zone monster like he was last year. So to wrap up the AFC North and the Cleveland Browns, RG3, I'm not drafting him at all. I get it. I get if you want to take a late round flyer, he's not going to be your starter come week 1, but I don't want to touch RG3. Duke Johnson, I'm going to draft him higher in PPR leagues, probably starting around the 5th round, even as high as the 4th round. But Johnson in a regular league, I'm starting to look around the 6th round, and then I would go Isaiah Crowell more in the 9th round. Corey Coleman, I think he's a 7th or an 8th round. He, because you can't deny that he is the number one option. He's still going to have good games, but until he proves that he is this ungodly wide receiver, or one of the quarterbacks on the team proves that he can actually get the ball to him, his value goes down. And for all the other Browns wide receivers, I leave them alone, let them go undrafted. If one of them breaks out, great. Let's try to pick them up on the waiver wire, or just chalk it up. They're still the Browns. They're still going to suck. And then Gary Barnidge, I see him as a low top 10 tight end, and I would look for him in the mid rounds. He kind of goes hand in hand. I think he's kind of similar to Ladarius Green. The possibilities are there, and there's the possibility that he could be a mid tier top 10 tight end. But I really see a regression year for him this year. I'm going to take a quick break, but when I come back, I got some fantasy prep advice. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get the latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all of your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is coming soon. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more, and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerds. It's now time for me to give you some fantasy prep advice. There's really not a ton aside from looking at all the information you can from websites and magazines, because the teams are still going through OTAs. There's still going to be injuries. There's not a ton you can really get prepared for, but you can start getting ready to try and make your league as fun as possible. And one of the ways that you can really kind of spice up your league is to come up with an interesting way to figure out your draft order. If anyone's watched the league on FX, one of the ways they determine draft order, they had there was a kid's birthday party, and there was a sack race, and whoever they picked kids, and whoever's kid won the sack race determined the draft order. Last year in a league that I was in, everybody in the league ran 40-yard dashes, and then depending on who was the fastest, the fastest person got to pick their spot in the draft, and then so on. I get it. For online drafts, random draft selection, it's kind of bland, and I've seen sometimes where it gets a little shady in online drafts with the random draft selection, where the commissioner of the league just happens to get the first pick overall. That's why I always like to, at the very least, pick names out of a hat. That should be the least you should be doing when you're trying to figure out draft order. For a long time in my Slackjaw league that we've been doing for a while, we've done a couple different ways, but the way that we've done it the most is lottery style. Where the last place team gets a best chance to get the top pick, and really it's you write down the last place team's name once, and the team who won the championship, they get 10 slips. All the names get put in a hat, and you draw until from 10 to 1, and it still gives some sort of difference, because there's the chance that the champion, who even though they have 10 slips in that hat, that everybody else could get picked before them, and they could have a higher draft pick. So be creative with trying to figure out your draft order. If you want to be quick about it, one thing that I just came up with, the Belmont Stakes, it's coming up. Assign everybody a horse, and then have that determine the way. Another way you can do it, have a backyard game. We're big fans in my league of Can Jam, but I know bag toss or cornhole, as you like to say, is another way you do it. You have a bag toss tournament, And if you can't get everyone together, I get that. But if you can, it makes the experience of the league so much better. You have way more fun. You don't want to just be a slave to logging in on your computer and fixing your lineup every year. Make your league fun, and you'll have more fun. So now, before we wrap up, we have the segment that I started last week called The King's Decree. As I did last week, I'm going to give you bold predictions this entire season, and we'll check in later to see just how right I actually was or how wrong I was. So last week, I went with a number 1 overall quarterback in Andrew Luck. I'm going to go again with a number 1 overall quarterback in Jameis Winston. And my predictions for this year, Jameis Winston, he's going to be a top 8 quarterback scoring-wise at the end of this year. I might be a little crazy, and I know it kind of tied in with that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan betting $9,000 on the team to win a Super Bowl. I don't think it's crazy, though, that Winston could have a pretty solid year. After the first half of the season, the first half, you pretty much write that off. It's a rookie quarterback, even if he is the number 1 pick overall. After the first half of the season, he had a terrible game where he had 5 picks, and he comes in, he starts settling down, he starts seeing things better, and I think he really just got used to that offense. Mike Evans he really wasn't himself. I think he was hurt for part of training camp, so Winston didn't really get a chance to develop that relationship with him. So he settled down with him. He still has Vincent Jackson. I think Austin Seferian-Jenkins, if he can stay healthy, is another good option. And then with Jameis Winston getting better, it also helped Doug Martin not, facing 8 men in the box. So he kind of came back to what we expected Doug Martin to be. And even though it was his rookie season last year, he finished the season with over 4,000 yards and 22 touchdowns. So if that's what you're doing in your rookie year, I don't think it's not that crazy to say that Jameis Winston kind of takes that next step. I'm not saying that the Bucs are gonna, win the Super Bowl next year. I just think that the possibility fantasy-wise is there for Jameis Winston to be a top 8 quarterback and really kind of climb the ladder. He could finish, somewhere in the top 5. I'm not really sure, but I definitely say he's going to be a top 8 quarterback this year. We'll be talking next year about how Jameis Winston is going to be one of the top quarterbacks picked in the draft. So as long as Doug Martin doesn't regress again and Winston continues to get better, he has the ability and weapons to be a top 8 quarterback. And that is the King's Decree. That'll wrap it up for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I want to thank you all for listening. I want to give a big shout out to the Fan Up Network. And I think next week, we've already covered all the North. I think we'll move on down to the South. I'll cover the NFC South next week. But that'll do it for me. I am Jason Jarvie. This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. See you later.